Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us on this other edition of Talking Point on your Pan-African television for you Media Africa. Today, we are going to be focusing on the continent's natural resources and how well the continent is making use of these natural resources to strive. What then is the scope for continental exploitation of these natural resources? The continent is said to be very, very rich, yet very poor. And that's the question we are asking today. How can Africa make use or exploit better its natural resources to be able to strive? And now, Africa is endowed with a vast array of natural resources that are central to its economic potential, holding approximately 30% of the world's natural reserves, 8% of natural gas and 12% of oil reserves. The continent boasts significant wealth in gold, chromium, and platinum, with 65% of the world's arable and arable land and 10% of its renewable freshwater resources. However, despite this abundance, Africa faces substantial challenges, including unsustainable resources use and substantial losses through illegal activities, estimated at $195 billion annually. The African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, AMCEN, has emphasized the critical need for sustainable management of natural capital to drive the continent's economic growth while aligning with the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the African Union Agenda 2063. What then explains Africa's robust natural wealth and its relatively limited level of economic development? We talk about this when we come back. It is always a pleasure to know you are glued to For You Media Africa. And today on Talking Point, we are looking at the continent's rich natural resources. Yet the continent is set to be experiencing a lot of poverty, or the continent is still to attain some level of economic growth, even though it has all of this natural resources. So we are asking the question today, what is the scope of for exploitation of Africa's natural resources? And today I have three gentlemen with me to discuss on this very pertinent issue that is facing the continent. And joining us all the way from the United States of America is Arthur Mobley. He is a historian as well as a journalist. Hello, sir, and thanks for honoring our invitation this day. Is Dr. Arthur Mobley there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good morning, Laurencia. Thank you for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking our time to be with us on the program this day. We equally have Dr. EKINDI John, who is joining us all the way from Cameroon, precisely in Boya. Thank you, sir, for honoring our invitation. Of course, he is an environmentalist. Thanks for honoring our invitation this day, sir.
Yes, it's a pleasure being again once more on Talking Point to talk about natural resources in Africa. It's a challenging topic because of other hidden agendas. We will share what we have as our own understanding to enlighten the public in terms of where Africa is and where we will be going the next century or in the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. EKINDI, for taking our time to be with us on the program this day. And we equally have Dr. Andy UKWENI, who is joining us all the way from Nigeria. He is an activist as well as a member of Society for Peace Studies and Practice, SPSP. Hello, sir, and thanks for joining us on the program. Is Dr. UKWENI there? Right. Dr. UKWENI will be joining us in the course of the program. We are hoping to have a very fruitful discussion this day on the program, especially as we're talking about the continent's natural resources, something that has been talked about and is still being talked about even today, given the fact that the country is endowed, as we all know, but then the continent is still striving, especially when it comes to its economic growth, is struggling to attain that economic growth that would have been attributed to it given the natural resources it is experiencing. Now, let's begin with you, Dr. Arthur Mobley. Let's begin with you. Now, when we talk about natural resources in Africa, and for someone who may not even know what we are talking about, what can you define as Africa's natural resources?
Well, Africa's natural resources, as you say, are vast. And because we've got the history and background of European exploitation of Africa, the rest of the world has used Africa as basically a basket where they can go and pick and essentially exploit what they want. And have done it for a very long time. They're spoiled on it. Several European countries are so much dependent on Africa's resources that they've become very wealthy and have become laden with products and those things that they've stolen and extracted for not very much in terms of reparation for those resources. And they've done that for hundreds of years now. And I'm talking about France, I'm talking about England, I'm talking about Germany, the Netherlands, and we can essentially go on from there. Also, the United States has been a very strong party of exploitation of African resources. Now, there are two reasons this happens. The number one reason is there are limited resources in many other parts of the world, particularly Europe. America, not so much. America is actually the number one oil exporter, for example, in the world. It is even more of an exporter and has more reserves than Saudi Arabia does. But you wouldn't think about America or the United States as being an exporter of a resource like oil, primarily because what these countries are doing, what the Europeans and Americans and other countries are doing, is they're saving their resources while they come to Africa and exploit Africa's resources. There's no limitation when they come to Africa to exploit resources. They've got an old colonial system that goes back to the Berlin Conference that gives them the mandate and the right to come into Africa and exploit resources. Southern Africa, for example, of the 34 or so resources and minerals that are needed to run any industrialized society, 16 of those are only found in Southern Africa. So there's some necessity built in that these countries have to come to Africa for certain things. But they're so greedy and so used to exploiting in any way that they want that they've really drained Africa of a lot of material resources. So we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about what we can do to change that scenario and move forward. We have to also talk about, what about Africa? What about Africans? What about our resource needs to not only sustain and operate essentially economies across the continent, but also the people? What are our needs? And we do need to address that and get into it. So
right,
I'll leave it there for now.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mobley. Of course, the continent needs to address that where we have foreigners, if I may put it, or the West coming in to exploit the continent's natural resources, like you mentioned there. But now, Dr. Ekindi, let me come to you now. When we look at the continent and its natural resources, would you really say that the continent is being exploited of its natural resources? That is to say, the foreign companies that are coming in to exploit all of these resources, they are taking all of this away and Africa is left with nothing, because that seems to be the scenario we are facing right now.
Thank you very much for coming back to me. You used a word at the entrance of this talk, that rich but poor. Yes, rich but poor in a sense. There is no African country, from the statistics that you gave, with the agenda which you have 2030, 2060. From all those agenda is that awareness has come to the limelight for all these countries. Now, there's no single country in Africa which is not endowed with natural resources. Each and everyone has, some have in abundance. So God has blessed Africa with all these resources. I think it's a blessing. So, but the problem with this rich but poor, it's you can put it in so many senses. But what is clear is that you have oil, you have gas, you have coal, you have copper, you have bauxite, you have gold, you have diamond, you have timber, you have other resources which we know. But the problem with this is the managerial aspect of it, right? Right. Dr. Nobby spoke a while ago about they stole most of those things in the past. I think that is why we feel it, this element of timber being carried. And starting from the simple point of timber, we will say that the logging process today, with all the conventions that they are bringing, some African countries are trying to curtail that transportation of the full logs into their country. So it is working, but it is not effectively working, because there are other things which you cannot control with that. When it comes to diamond and gold and all the other resources, yes, we have them, but the price, the standard price, is not set by those who are producing it, and that's another issue, right? So rich but poor. Even when it comes to the currency issue is also a barrier to step up the step for African countries when they have the resources. So if awareness is not raised one way or the other, what we are talking about, the rich but poor, has its place, right? But some of the countries now today have understood that we need to start curtailing and have our own production industry or transformation companies or create plants which can sustain some of these things. So some are already fast, with the approach. Some are still lingering behind. So when it comes to all of these, what we will say is that the policies in the countries, I'm not familiar with almost 70%, but with the 50% that I'm familiar, when it comes to mining, for example, I know there is that aspect of giving agreement, and internal policy makes it in such a way that no foreign country can come in without to exploit, without having a certain percentage for the national or for the person, the local person involved. But that's not the case. When you go and look into the document critically, you realize that it is empty, and that's why that element of stealing is still it's a modernized stealing nowadays with all this. So rich but poor, it stands. But it comes to policy implementation, it's a problem. So the issue is that some of the leaders are not looking at the context of the world context to have a global market or to have a sectorial market in such a way that they come as a block. But as they are going individually, that's why it is manipulated, and the element of currency is already a barrier for Cameroon or Kenya or Tanzania or the other countries to emerge with respect to their gold or with their uranium which they are producing. So there are so many limiting factors which, if we are standing with this element of rich versus poor, it will continue, and even all these agendas which they are put, it will not hold because they are not negotiating from the point of Africa, but they are negotiating with internal bias already. So
Right.
those are the things that I can put in terms of this resources management, which we are talking today to show that.
Right, Dr. Ekindi, I'm going to come back to you. I just wanted to put forth another question to you in line with what you were saying. And if Dr. Ekindi is still there with us, would you say from everything you said, Dr. Ekindi, is Dr. Ekindi still there with us? Right. Right, I'm going to come back to Dr. Ekindi in the minutes that follow. Let's come back to you, Dr. Mobley. Now, would you say Dr. Ekindi said something there that is because of the way everything is being managed that we are not able to see Africa emerge as a continent that has this natural resources because of maybe personal interest and that? Would you say corruption is one of those things that is making Africa lag behind when it comes to the exploitation of its natural resources?
Oh, yes, indeed, Laurencia. Certainly corruption plays a major part in the problems that Africa faces. And again, it's been a historic effort to exploit, through corruption, the resources of the African continent. And we, at least for the foreseeable future, are going to continue to see this operate because particularly the West, European countries in particular, feel entitled to essentially exploit Africa. And that's a cycle that we need to break, but it is not going to be broken under the current system. And we'll talk a little bit about, the politics of why that doesn't work. We talk about Africa's resource potential and Africa's resource possession as being a blessing. Yes, it is a blessing, but it's also a curse because other countries feel that what is under the feet of African people belongs to them. And anytime you have that kind of equation, then you have the dynamic for not only exploitation, but violent exploitation. And that has been essentially the principle. What Europe has wanted from Africa, what the U.S. has wanted from Africa, if they couldn't negotiate with some particular leader in some small country where that field of resources may cover several countries, but they'll pick and go into the particular country that they have the advantage or they have some kind of corruptive, exploitive effort already underway, and they'll tap into those resources at that point. And then they will exploit everything. They'll exploit the entire region. There's what's called slant drilling of oil, where a country may have a oil well or oil derrick set up, and they're extracting oil in one country. But that pool of oil that is under that country extends and runs under other countries that are surrounding. Now they have the technology to drill at a slant so that they can go in and drill into the reserves of those other countries and extract that oil, for example, or natural gas, for example, and do so without anybody even knowing on the surface that that is what they're doing. So what Africa needs to understand about its resources is that they are coveted. But you don't see, for example, in Europe, the same kind of exploitation of resources, even though there are resources all over the world. There actually are resources under every continent. I live here in the southwestern part of the United States, which is very rich in gold. But gold mining requires an abundance of water. So gold is not really extracted and mined here for two reasons. number one, as I just mentioned, there's not a lot of water in southwestern U.S., so they don't have a lot of rivers, and you've got to use a lot of water to extract gold. But the other reason is that you have people and populations that live on top of the ground, that live on that land, and they use the land for other reasons. And those reasons take precedent over a mining operation per se. And besides, they can get gold from Africa. Why tear up and exploit and strip mine all of the lands in America and Europe when you can go down to Africa and just strip mine and destroy the environment, destroy the ecosystems, because no one is going to stop you, because there's so many different countries that you can tap into any one of them, and you can exploit the countries that are adjacent. So we've got to get away from the political dynamic in Africa that makes it so easy for European powers to come in and destroy the environment, exploit the resources, dig where they want, and do all the damage and pollutive things that they would never do in Europe and in America. Go to Europe and you'll see rivers and river cruises and castles and all these ancient things. Where are the ancient things that Africans built? Africans were the first to build ancient things, but those things have been destroyed. They've been plundered. And you go to the US and they brag about their infrastructure systems and the things that they have so that they can move people around, so that people can live on the continent of North America. They're less concerned about doing that kind of environmental damage. They have all kinds of environmental regulations, but in Africa, there's no regulation. You may have some in one spot or another, but does the country next door have to honor the same regulations and restrictions that another country does? So again, it's this patchwork, balkanized system of former colonies that creates an ease for the exploitation of African resources. So I see that a couple of other of your panelists have joined. So I will certainly just digress to their input. But thank you, and I'll be back.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mobley, for that insight. Now we have Dr. Andy UKWENI, who just joined us all the way from Nigeria. Hello, sir, and thanks for joining us on the program this day.
Thanks for having me.
Is Dr. UKWENI there?
Yeah, I said thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, we are glad to have you in our midst this day. Now let's dive straight away into the subject matter. We are talking about the natural resources of the continent and how the continent is not able to fully benefit from these natural resources. And like I mentioned earlier on, the continent is said to be very rich in natural resources, yet it is poor. What explains this? What can you say about Africa's natural resources and why the continent is where it is today, given the fact that the continent is rich in oil, in gas, in bauxite, in copper, and many other natural resources? Dr. UKWENI? Right, Dr. UKWENI will be back with us in the minutes that follow. We seem to have lost him. He's going to join us once again. Let me come back to you, Dr. EKINDI. Now, in our earlier, our previous discussion, you made mention of something that...
Nigerian. Let me share a bitter tale. The
Right, we seem to be having a little bit of issues with Dr. UKWENI. Is he back with us?
Government response to...
Sounds like a bad signal.
Right. We're going to be coming back to you, Dr. UKWENI. It seems the lines are not very good. We are going to come back with you in the minutes that follow. Let me come back to you, Dr. EKINDI. Dr. EKINDI, we were talking earlier on how Africa can actually manage this natural resources for it to be able to benefit from it, and you made mention of some of managerial issues. Now, earlier on, I was talking with Dr. MOBLEY about corruption, and I was asking, would you say corruption is one of those major issues that is making Africa to stay where it is when it comes to the exploitation of its natural resources? Some people just want to benefit by themselves without thinking of others.
No, the word corruption will not suit the context. Thank you very much for coming back to me. It will not suit the context. The problem is greed. The problem is greed. So once you understand the element of greed, it is both internal and external. And that is why the element of governance, when it comes to natural resources, is how will I put it? Is it's in the dark end for the public, and that is why when you come to Africa, you will not have any data. It's a malicious act and unintentional, which the malgovernance in general. People want to stay in power. People want to control wood. People want to control gold. People want to control diamond. People want to control uranium. People want to control all the resources. So the centralization of this element makes it in such a way that it's very complex. And the complexity makes it also with all the intricacy that you can have. And that is why we are poor. And the element of corruption, yes, it is key. It is key. But when I put greed here, is that I see the friendship nature, which people, they sort of
We're going to come back to you, Dr. EKINDI. We're going to come back to you. The signal today seems to not be very favorable from your end, but hopefully we are going to come back to you to continue with this very interesting discussion. Now, coming back to you, Dr. MOBLEY. Now, in what ways can Africa actually leverage its natural resources to achieve a greater economic independence?
Has such abundant resource potential. Africa is in a key position to not only enrich the continent of Africa, but enrich African people to a wild, unimaginable richness and vastness in potential as Africa wants to move forward. We could really solve any kind of poverty problem anywhere on the continent of Africa because Africa is so self-sustained with its resources. It has such abundant resources. It can not only take care of all of the people across the African continent, and there would be no poverty anywhere on the African continent, but it can then have a surplus of resources that can still be able to benefit trading partners in whatever part of the world African people choose. But Africa has to assert the power to have control over its resources. You mentioned corruption, and my response was yes, there definitely is corruption. Control and greed are essentially principles of corruption. That is how corruption is manifest. It comes out in greedy, controlling, exploitive ways where other countries come in and feel that they can just take what they want from Africa. France, for example, has 14 former colonies that it still has under its system of exploitation, corruptive exploitation, when they're taking, at last reports, $500 billion a year just from the banking reserves of those 14 countries and forcing those African countries to deposit those money in those resources into the French system, into the French central bank, for example. That's just one example of the many kinds of exploitive problems that Africa faces. So how does Africa wrest back that control of its financial resources? How does it wrest back the fact that all of its offshore leasing has been essentially sold away to Western countries primarily, and that they have the right to come anywhere along the African coast that they would like and drill for oil or natural gas wherever they find it. And they can do that at any time they feel it prudent to do so, or they're essentially free to do that. The reason for that is a political reason. It is not something that's debatable. This is what is happening in Africa, all around the continent, and that is the challenge for Africa. Africa has to protect its resources just like every other country in the world has to do. If you want to maintain power over your own land and your own resources, you have to exert that. That is not going to be enforced or essentially respected by any outside power. Africa has to do that. And I have more to say about that, but did you get your lines cleared up from Nigeria and Cameroon?
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mobley. And if you're just tuning in, you're watching Talking Point on For You Media Africa. And today we are focusing on the continent's natural resources and what scope the continent actually has for the exploitation of these resources. The continent is said to be rich, yet poor, given the fact that when it comes to its economic development, it's still struggling to attain that level if we have to match it with the natural resources that are present in the continent. How then can actual Africa make use of its natural resources? And does the continent actually, when it goes to the negotiating table to negotiate with those foreign companies that come to exploit these resources, do they actually get a fair deal? Those are some of the questions that we'd like to answer into this edition of the program. Now, if Dr. EKINDI is back with us, is Dr. EKINDI back with us? Is Dr. EKINDI there? Dr. UKWENI? Okay, Dr. EKINDI, thank you. I'm sorry we missed what you were saying earlier on, and you can just pick up from there. You can just carry on from there. We were talking about the issue of greed and corruption and how that is actually limiting the continent with the exploitation of its resources.
Yes, what I just want to add in the course of this discussion is that there is a copy-paste way of managing things. And when you come to policy, you will realize that most of I think Andy talked about it a while ago, which is a copy-paste sort of issue, which they will tell you that that's how it works. But there's no clear standard because he did mention that the element of protecting what we have, but the governance makes it in such a way that there is no protective measures. Even when you have the standards which you have set internally, there are always gaps which you identify, and that is what makes it tricky in the sense that they will use our own brothers, the African brothers, to corrupt the system. So they are not coming with an angelic face, but they are coming with hidden agendas, and that's why you will definitely see that all of the resources. He mentioned something which was quite interesting with this the exploitation now, which they can perforate in another country without necessarily you noticing at the surface area, and which is a clear determination that there are evil intentions on all what we are saying in terms of helping us. They are not helping us. The policies of most of those countries are not to come to look at our beautiful faces. It is to exploit our own resources. And where is the market located? Where is the trading market located? So there are so many steps or so many elements which makes that, even when it comes to this element of diamond, you find it that it is also challenging. It comes to wood, it's also challenging. Billions of dollars are being piled in the trading system. So it's a system which is not favorable for Africans. I think at the given time, you will have to close your borders and know exactly what you have within your natural resources. But that has not been done. The African countries, they don't have sometimes some don't have the capacity. And that's why it is just done haphazardly and nobody controls it. And that's why you have war everywhere. Because people are greedy and the system, those who are not happy will go and lobby to have the other party. So it is something which we must come on a common ground and sit on the table and say, okay, what do we have? There are cases which I would not like to mention the country, which they brought Australians to check the iron ore content. But what was reported was not the exact value. So you have so many misleading factors which are internal, which are piling up. Then you have the international standard, which is already biased for Africans to emerge, because all what this strategy which you talked about 2030, 20, it will not work. It will not work because the same people that have financed those strategies to put in place, there's the same people coming into the country and to breach those strategies which they have put in place. So, for my own perspective, I think the sectorial policies which countries are trying to come together will definitely start from there to curtail some of these resources to go out of the domain which we are already, because we stand the chance of practically losing everything. Most of those countries that are purchasing, because it's an open market, a free zone, they are not exploiting theirs. Theirs is a reserve. They call it theirs reserve, but they call us exploitation. So they come and buy with the element of currency, because the element of currency is very fundamental when it comes to economy. Somebody's money is your own is 100 or I don't know 100 shillings or whatsoever compared to his. So you see that there's already a discrepancy, and that is why if it's not protected from the inside and have a common ground, all the other African countries have a common ground and say we are not selling this, and the market, we make the market in such a way that it will trade in Africa among Africans first before we start looking. But I know, from the perspective of all this war which we are seeing, if the African position is that we trade sub-regionally or regionally, you will see infiltration and you will start seeing war here and there, encroachment, because they don't want people to organize. So it's a malicious and an intentional thing which they don't want people to organize, especially the African countries, to organize themselves so that they can benefit from the resources. And that is why it's still precarious. It's still haphazard. It's not organized. Even when it's organized, for example, the diamond thing, it's a market which, it's not African countries which have set the standards. They don't even know that their tonnage or their capacity, their carrying capacity. So there is that way forward is to start to build capacity within people who are trustworthy, who have integrity, so that when we move into this element of this law which we have put in place, we are able to say, okay, no, here we have gone wrong, and here we have not done it well. So it will give us data. So all the resources that are going, there is no clear data. Even the data that they are projecting, it's false. There is no clear data. Even the government himself, those governments which are selling, they don't have a clear statistic because of the personnel which are not trustworthy persons. So even when we protect, there are other safeguards measures which we have to put into place in order to be able to circumscribe all the loopholes which are there. Because all these multinationals that are coming, they are not coming in their name. They are coming in the name of their government. And that is why we have all this war here and there, farming and all the other things. Brother cannot be fighting brother because all the countries have resources. So, but the problem is that when we talk about this element of corruption and greed, you see that some people have decided to carve it and to exclude some people. And the simple truth is, if it is not rationally distributed, that rationality, and that is why we have problems here and there. And the problem of being rich but poor stands. And even all the policies which they will put in place, the strategy which they are working in the African level, it will not work. It will not work because the strategy was financed by those who want those resources. So until when Africans will stand up and say, okay, we start from a penny and move on, then we'll start understanding. Because time and again, they have come up with their slogans. Let's tie our belts. We are reaching at the end, but we are not reaching at the end. So what is the problem? The problem, I think we have the solution.
Right, so Dr. EKINDI, thank you so much. Africans have to stand together and have one voice if the continent needs to strive and if the continent needs to attain that economic growth that it is looking forward to. Dr. UKWENI is back with us. Hello, sir. We continue to talk about the continent's natural resources and how the continent can benefit from this. Now, you had the floor earlier on. You can pick up from there. Carry on. Dr. UKWENI, is he there with us? Is Dr. UKWENI there? Right, we will be coming back to Dr. UKWENI. We seem to be having a little bit of issues getting through to Dr. UKWENI. Let me come back to you, Dr. EKINDI, before I go back to Dr. MOBLEY. We're talking there about the continent standing together to be able to make use or to see its natural resources flourish and also make the different countries benefit from it. So what then do Africans need to do? How can Africans speak with one voice? How can Africa understand that if I benefit from this, my brother benefits from it, it's going to lead the continent to a better place? How then do we educate Africans on that?
I think we'll definitely need to organize another program for just to talk effectively how to organize, because the program starts from the grassroots. It's a two-way approach, which once you've given people the knowledge, you need to set policies, and you have to check also the element of accountability, because the element of accountability is fundamental when it comes to resource management, right? And when it comes to this element of accountability, you also associate now the element of the sort of transparency. You know, countries have been producing petrol. So many people don't know the statistics, and the element of, that's why I talk about it starts from the internal disposition of each state or each country, because some of the countries, some of this exploitation does not enter into the annual budget or the country budgeting, right? And so that element of checks and balances is already a biased one. So that's why you see the element of being rich but poor is stands, because being rich at the level of the country, it's a felony and or a fallacy, which people have coined it that we are rich because we have resources. But I know some of the precedents, which some of the governance structure which are in place, needs to be refurbished, because the canker worm has eaten already in the system. So there are so many steps which we must be able to revisit and see where we have gotten, where we are, because we don't even know where we are, even when we can set the pace on saying that these are the steps. It needs another degree of implementation, because at times they'll put these policies, but the policies are empty. So first, I think we need to build capacities in-house. Capacities in terms of knowing where the resources are. They have already given us the maps. They have produced the maps, so they know, and they know their quantities. So, but we are still to get to the quantities. So we need capacity built in our schools, our educational program. We need to insert all of these so that we start training people from grassroots. We don't need to go and be training them only in the university, but we start training them basically to know exactly that we are getting towards this direction. That's one element. The other element will come into the sectoral policies, which when you talk about sectoral policies, we are saying that there are some ministry overlapping on the other ministry objective or mission, and that overlapping nature makes that there is a paradigm shift in terms of gap and in terms of emptiness and in terms of corruption, in terms of greed. So that overlapping of role and responsibility makes it in such a way that it becomes conflictual. So that conflictual nature also, you can see it now at the level of the sub-region, because I am producing, I have my partner, which is maybe the United States or France or Britain or I don't know, I'm just saying something like that, which in the world market is well positioned. So there are so many levels of which, in terms of when it comes to these natural resources, safeguard measures are fundamental, but the element of awareness is also key, which I think is central. Once we have built the capacity, we start making the policies, then we put safeguard measures, but it does not end with that, because the element of currency here is also the countries need to ratify or to change systematically or have I don't know, I'm just putting it, a 180 degrees turn from the position which they are in terms of this element of currency, because the currency a double standard issue. So let me just end here and give the floor to others to share, because I think this element of where do we have to go from here, because we are at the junction, which if we don't take our own destiny into our hands, I think the next century will be a very difficult one and challenging.
Thank you so much, Dr. EKINDI. Now you're talking about the issue of currency, and I'm going to put that out to you, Dr. Mobley. Do you think that this issue of currency, because with what we trade with, it also determines how much economic growth we are going to experience in the continent? Do you think if Africa decides to get a single currency in all of its trading, it's going to somewhat solve this problem of maybe handling its natural resource exploitation?
No, I don't think it will have an effect at all, Laurencia. In fact, I think it might even deepen the problem. But it is a step in the right direction. It's just not the step that we need. And I agree with Dr. John that we probably should have another program about the solutions to this, because I know we have very limited time. But if you look around the world, if I told you or asked you, what are the most powerful countries on the face of the earth? You would say the United States, China, you would say Canada, Russia, Australia, and then you would start going to lesser countries, the continent of Europe, because Europe operates as a unified structure. They have NATO, they understand unity, they understand that there is power in unity. The other element is land mass. If you look at a map of the world, Africa is the second largest land mass on the globe. Next to Asia, Africa is the next largest landmass on the planet. America, Canada, Russia, China, you look at those from space and you will see that they are huge land masses. Their power, their very power, is in the land mass that they control. Africa has been subdivided into small cookie cutter countries. And that is Africa's problem. When we think of Africa, we just think of one continent and one people. And you know that when you go abroad, regardless of what state you're from, people think, oh, you're Cameroonian? Oh, you're from Togo, you're from Ghana. No, they know you're from Africa. And they see you as one people. We are one people. We are still one people, but we've been subdivided by other people. And that's insidious, because they know that in that subdivision, by creating 54 states just on the African continent, that is an ideal situation to come in and exploit all 54 of those states, because they've been marginalized into micro-states. And that is Africa's problem. Everybody else understands, hey, let's forget the states in China, forget the states in Russia, forget the states even in the United States. You have land mass, and you have a huge land mass to operate and draw from, and you cooperatively pull resources from one spot, one point in your land mass, and move it to another. You're free to do that. Africa can't do that, and that's something that Africa is going to have to understand and learn to resolve through unity. And I don't see that on the horizon yet in Africa in a way that will help Africa sustain and evolve to solve some of these problems. But that is essentially the principal problem that Africa is going to have to overcome.
Right, Dr. Mobley, thank you very much. Africa needs to do a lot to be able to get its natural resources benefit the continent, especially the common man. And over time, we have seen how these natural resources have actually plagued communities rather than bringing these communities out of poverty. And we've seen that in the case of Nigeria, especially in the Niger Rich Delta, where in the course of exploitation of oil, we have seen oil spills where communities have had to suffer from that. So coming back to you, Dr. EKINDI, how can we make communities to understand? Because we also have illegal activities that are being carried out in the process of trying to get to this natural resources, and we have the local communities that suffer from it. How can we sensitize the local communities where we have these resources being found so that they can use it to actually grow, to actually develop, rather than bringing them down?
That's a very complex one as well, because the problem about this element of poverty, you can look in terms of material or in terms of spirituality or in terms of always wanting to challenge yourself. So, but you just cited the case of Nigeria, which is just around the Gulf of Guinea, between which is also an area of high interest, and I think the U.S. is also working silently there, and it's a challenging one. But let me just look at it. The simple truth about those type of things, if you go in Sierra Leone, you will see also some type of exploitation, artisanal exploitation of gold. So it's because of poverty, and poverty is irrational distribution of resources. The dividends or the profit made by these sales of things. So those who are in a position, they always have the big cars. Those who are in position, they have luxury things. They have so many cars. They are, their kids go to rich, So what do you expect that somebody who is seeing a pipe of refined oil passing by his backyard will not take an axe to pierce?
Thank you.
So to solve the problem about you talk about sensitization. No, the problem is sensitization comes in only when you see that you have given, then it's not working. So it's a two-way, it's a give and take. I don't have no put that it's the same side of the coin, because you are taking without giving, and so once you take without giving, artisanal thing will always, in terms of legality, what is legal is also have this other side of the coin, which is illegal. So what I am saying here is that sensitization is starting by the fact that the programs which they put into the schools, you provide amenities so that those who are very poor, and that's why they have scholarship from some of these, their entry point, which is the social corporate responsibility of these companies to take care of some of those things. But it is on the paper. It is not effectively implemented, and that's why you have also that element of accountability and transparency. If the government does not enforce that, no matter the sensitization that you do, people will be still doing what they are doing, which is illegal. So to curtail illegality, everybody accept that and the end of sensitization can go across, and we are knowledgeable and they distributed evenly, people behave well. But when there is a two-way check balance or a scale which is not taking into consideration the voices of those who are poor, you will have those tycoons creating illegal milieu, which definitely exploitation will be passing. So if oil is coming from the area is not developed. Most of these areas which you are talking in for example, the delta, the Gulf of Guinea, those are swampy areas or those are mangrove areas which FCLF, some French company who do this exploitation. And now we are seeing that this exploitation of oil, because the states are quite many, and that's why community cannot allow it to go, because they are not seeing the collapse. So it is but normal. They will act, but exploitation, it goes with other parameters, giving them income generating as well, that also change this illegal action which is taking towards the resources and making it a different share. So it is very vital to sensitize, yes, but it does not end there. You must accompany them, give them income generating activities so that you reduce the pressure on what you are taking and give them also a fitting milieu in which they can still analyze and take portable water.
Right, Dr. EKINDI, thank you very much. Besides sensitization, these people in these communities where we have these natural resources, they need to be provided with something to sustain them, because, of course, they know that they have something from which they can benefit. But at the end of the day, they can't benefit from that. And it leads to all of these illegal activities, like you rightly mentioned there. But we are also hoping that when these companies or these foreign companies come to do this exploitation, they should be able to, in one way or the other, provide jobs or provide other facilities to these people of the area where they're coming to exploit. Now, I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Mobley, and my next question now is how the continents can actually bargain to get a fair share on the global markets. Now, what are the challenges that you think the continent is faced with when it comes to negotiating fair deals of their natural resources on the global market, and how can they achieve that? How can they go about that?
Thank you, Laurencia. Once again, Africa has no control. Africa has no negotiating ability. There is no body in Africa. There's no legislative body or no governmental body that is capable of negotiating with large multinational corporations or these larger countries, for that matter, because those elements that would be at the table have no power. They have no authority to speak for anyone except for their little sliver of Africa that they are representing. How can a country like Togo negotiate offshore oil with giant companies out of Great Britain and the United States? It's an unequal match when you even think about it in theory. African countries are too fractionalized to have any way to change that dynamic. So how you change that dynamic is you get rid of 54 bordered states and you form a union that then has or then can be empowered to negotiate over vast regions and vast areas. What will happen in those regions, and you certainly can back those up with regulations and laws and other things that would essentially give you the same power everybody else operates under around the rest of the world. They do that through installing those controls to make sure that poverty is eradicated, that everyone has equal access to and use and utilization of resources in their area, whether it be gold or it's electric power or it's cellular phone service or it's any number of different things that occur as a result of controlling your resources. If you don't control your land, you can't control your resources. That is fundamental to all of the rest of the world. Africa refuses, for whatever reason, to embrace that. I think the basic reason is that they've operated under a colonial system for so long, they believe the colonial system should be the standard. Colonialism has never and will never be the standard for equalization or fighting exploitation, eradicating poverty, all of the things that essentially stem from that. So we've got to get rid of the mentality that Africa is not Africa. If we can get to a point where we understand at least, even if you keep the various states, it becomes something that is like the vision that Kwame Nkrumah had. He had the Federation of African States. The Federation of African States would allow all the African states to come together, sit together and say, we're 54 multiple states, but we operate as one when it comes to the things that help the people of Africa or that will solve problems for the people of Africa. That can be structured. It's not a hard dynamic to achieve if you want to work with the system that you have now, but it certainly would be nice to see an eradication of the colonial system and brought under a system that's African-centric, Africa-controlled, where Africa has the power and the say about what happens on the African continent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mobley. Now, how do we get these African heads of state or African leaders to understand that unity is the key to achieving that milestone, that economic growth that the continent is currently striving for? I believe some African countries are already understanding that. But then majority of the African countries are yet to align with that. So what needs to be done to get the continent to understand that unity is key?
I think what's going on in the Sahel is a good example of what needs to happen across the African continent. I think that what went on 30 years or so ago in Southern Africa, where forces combined to get rid of apartheid, for example, in Southern Africa, because it was such a hideous leftover of exploitation from the British and the French and the Germans who had colonies there in Southern Africa and were just very virulently just despotic in how they administered those colonies. So you've got to get rid of a lot of the leaders that are not thinking the way the African populace wants the leadership to think. African youth, for example, I think have different kind of fire, a different kind of motivation. They see things more clearly. They've got a better grasp of international information, and they understand what's at stake and that their future should be vibrant and they should not be in poverty. But you've got to elect the right leaders. You have to make sure that it's not interference in your elective processes so that you can put the right people in power so that they can then say, hey, we need to work cooperatively, at least regionally, and preferably cooperate across the entire continent so that we can then turn around and control what happens in Africa with its resources so that we can more easily disseminate the fruits of those resources to every corner of the continent and everyone across the continent. It should be so easy. Africa should be so rich, and people should no people anywhere in Africa should be impoverished. It is absolutely no reason for it other than you have these sectors that are exploiting African people, and they are taking the cream off the top and not allowing anything to filter down to the common people in Africa at any substantial rate. And that's unacceptable, and it certainly can be eliminated and alleviated very quickly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mobley, and we have a few more minutes to be together. And before I come back to you for your last words, let me get back to you, Dr. EKINDI. Now, we see African countries signing more and more partnerships over the days. And now, in the last few days, African countries have signed bilateral deals, be it in the field of natural resources or others. Dr. EKINDI, do you think that if we get these African countries understanding that if they are one another's keeper, they have to look out for each other, it's going to somewhat solve the continent's problem of maybe over-dependence on the external world?
One thing which I recall is that power corrupts. And in the element of geopolitics, there is no bilateral or multilateral agreement which it's devoid of interest, and that's why they can sign. But we, from the perspective, we have learned that there is no such deal without clear cheating, because I'll put it the word cheating. But I know nobody said a while ago that the currency problem is not key. So they are going into this agreement. What is the currency that they're going to use? Is it the US or the euro? So that's why I agree with him when he said, he talked about the landmass, because when you take the African population, if you put it in one context, you can have a strong force. But like I mentioned, power corrupts. To have a federated Africa or 54th federation, or it's a daunting task. But I know there is already something which is working in terms of ECOWAS or CEMAC and other people, which are also trying to form something. But it doesn't work because, like I mentioned, power corrupts, and those who have to lead. Once you are in that type of setup, if you emerge, like what we are witnessing in West Africa with these three countries coming together, it's already a force, and it's a force, but a force which is attached to another colonial master or another power, which it's a type of game which I think Africans need to revert back to Africans and have a common discourse, a common dialogue on a platter which would put all these things into place. Because I don't think the African Union is helping Africans, because most of the negotiation, it's like nobly mentioned, it's on a state basis. It's not taking the sub-region. It's not. It is very trickish, and that's why we are standing the chance nowadays. That's why I mentioned a while ago that we are on a junction. Either we are going to perish or we will make it. So if those three countries are already setting the example, I think others need to emulate and leave those old setup which they are. It is very difficult. I don't understand why it's difficult. Traditionally, Africans were people which could understand the other person, but I don't know, is it this democracy thing which it's empty, which is making this element of greed and corruption, and so at times we wonder where we are going, because we elected people with their vision, but when they get to power, the vision changes. So and we are caught. Even when we say land protection, the land protection element which we have here is protecting only the power and not protecting those who give power to the people who are in power. So let me just use that to tell you that it's a very complex dynamics which there is a need for a paradigm shift in terms of how to approach some of these things, not going solo or going individually, but going as a cohort or a team of country negotiating this. If you don't have it, why can't you create the industry in one or two countries so that we know that our refinery, we can refine petrol, the crude petrol in Nigeria, and we'll come and buy it from there. If Cameroon cannot have a refinery, or Cameroon have, so there is a give and take which Africans must start within their own country, and now having in terms of sub-region, have a single voice, because as it stands, the way we are going, we will still fall prey of what we are trying to reduce or trying to control.
Right, Dr. EKINDI, just your last words as we move out of this edition of the program. What are your last words to Africans, especially when it comes to this issue of natural resources and its exploitation?
We should be people who are really custodian to the resources. So if it doesn't go, we will stand and march against those who think that they are more than us. So I'm advocating for actions in terms of taking position when the resources are being dilapidated or taken without clear explanation where the fallout will be directed.
Thank you so much, Dr. EKINDI. Thank you very much. Dr. Mobley, your last words before we go.
Yes, thank you again, Laurencia. You're a very gracious host. We have to understand that geology and geography matter. And when we look at the geography in particular of Africa as it relates to the rest of the world, Africa should be the superpower. Africa should have more power than Russia. Africa should have more power than China and America, or all three of them put together, because Africa has that much command over resources. African people, oh yes, we are powerful people. We've been powerful since the beginning of time. We are the original people. We are the original continent. We understand power, but we don't have to be afraid of power. And I don't have to be afraid of you, Laurencia, being queen of the world or Africa. That'd be a beautiful thing to me. Or for my brother Dr. John being certainly president of the entire continent of Africa. He said power corrupts, and I don't care. It's about Africans having power. We let everybody else corrupt us. Europe can be corrupt. America can be corrupt. We can even expect Russia or China to be corrupt. Africa has to grow within its own ability and nurture those people that we would have in leadership positions to do what's necessary for African people. Nothing can be worse than the situation that Dr. Allende has outlined thus far, where we are not going to have any control and we're going to just continue to move forward and be exploited. That is not acceptable. So we have to get youth out in the streets and in the public sector and fight for these things. And we have to do that now. We have to do that internationally. We have to call in the Pan-Africanists and get people involved so that Africa can move to a true state of independence and freedom on the African continent. That's the only way we can move forward.
Right, Dr. Mobley, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your wonderful insights this day. And we also want to thank Dr. EKINDI John for the wonderful thoughts and the wonderful explanation that he gave over there when it comes to this issue of natural resources and its exploitation and what the continent needs to do to be able to benefit from all of this. We have to think about the people at the grassroots. What are they benefiting from all of this? And the continent needs to stand as one, need to be able to understand that divided we fall, together we stand. And if you're not able to stand as one, then the continent is going to continue to take the downward turn. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking our time to be with me. Dr. Mobley, who joined us all the way from the United States of America. He's a historian as well as a journalist, and we equally had Dr. EKINDI John will join us from Cameroon. He is an environmentalist. Thank you so much. We also had Dr. Andy UKWENI, who joined us briefly, and we're hoping that in our next editions of the program we can have you fully so that we can have a wonderful discussion. Transmissions continue, but for now it is bye-bye from this end.